There are invitations that aren't honors. They're tests to see whether you finally cracked. The envelope wasn't even sealed, just wedged between a coupon book and a donation flyer in her residential mailbox, as if it had gotten lost, and some neighbor had shoved it in at random. Sophie turned it over, noting the crest embossed faintly in gold, her father's new department insignia. Below it, the words, "You are cordially invited to the celebration of Chief Nicholas Carter's promotion to City Police Commissioner." Her name wasn't even centered. Printed as an afterthought, a half-sized font beside Liam's like a margin note someone forgot to delete. Sophie Williams, optional guest. The parentheses weren't real, but they felt real enough. Back inside, she set the envelope down on her breakfast bar with surgical care. The apartment around her was silent, sterile, everything in its place. No clutter, no decor. The kind of environment where noise had to earn its right to exist. Her fingers flexed briefly a habit from drills. One beat of breath to assess, analyze, dismiss. She had not heard from her father in over a year. The last time they'd exchanged more than a grunt had been at her brother's engagement party, a night she had left early after being mistaken for a bodyguard by the valet. And now this. She moved into the living room where light spilled pale and unforgiving through the blinds. Her boots thudded softly against the floor as she walked to her shelf. A small metal stand where military memorabilia was tucked away without sentiment. 2 combination plaques, a coin from NATO. A worn, silver insignia. Her gaze drifted to the bottom drawer. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, her mind took her somewhere colder. Much colder. A winter storm. A girl, aged 10, curled in the corner of a wooden storage shed behind their old house arms, wrapped tight around her knees. Her teeth clacked against each other like a wind-up toy. Sophie stood in her silent apartment, the invitation cooling her palm. The words blurred, not out of tears but from a flood of memories. A cold wind, a burlap blanket, the sharp sting of metal beneath her fingertips as she cracked her small fists, hiding from the world behind a tiny shed. It was childish. Liam falling, his arm broken. But the blame had come crashing down on her like a winter storm. 3 nights of silence. No food, no warmth, just her father's shadow lurking beyond the frosted window. Years of discipline, of climbing through military ranks, all for what? To be ignored, unseen. She'd graduated top of her class, yet he hadn't come. No explanation. Only that empty seat, that ghostly photo of her saluting a world that never saw her. Now the words on that invitation burned sharper than ever. "City, Public Safety Director," she whispered, a bitter laugh. Of course. She moved to her closet, pulling out dress uniform. Pressed, pristine, a ghost of her former selves. But she left it hanging there. No, tonight needed something else. Her fingers found a simple black suit, sleek, sharp, tactical, like a shadow. She would show up, but not to celebrate. To observe, to watch, to remind everyone. She's not just the girl in the shadows. As she slipped into her new armor, her mind raced. What does it mean? This party? This recognition? Not for her father's legacy. That's never really been hers. It's theirs. The mayor, the press, her brother, Liam, drunk on praise. They think she's just the wandering daughter, the one who never settled, chose the army over family. They don't know what she's really fighting for. But tonight, she wouldn't be unseen anymore. Not entirely. Because sometimes the biggest realization slams hardest when you least expect it. When standing before an invitation that looks like a prize, Sophie suddenly understands. She's been chasing someone else's approval. All her life, validation has been tied to her father's shadow. But that shadow, it's not her. Never was. And as the city lights flickered through the window, she knew. She did not need their recognition. She was the only one who could define her place. And maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the night she finally starts to do that. Sophie moved toward the old metal cabinet, a relic from a life she barely recognized. The dial turned with a sharp click, echoing in the stillness. Inside, a small matte black case caught her eye, labeled Operation Sigma Cha Sha E5. Her name wasn't just a whisper here, it was boldly etched, unerasable. With a single tap of her finger, she felt a surge of defiance. "If they need a name to laugh at," she murmured, "they're about to relearn how to pronounce it." For 2 decades, she had kept quiet, letting them think she was nothing. But the truth? It could get people killed. The thrum of helicopter blades sliced through the cold night air, a slow, deliberate countdown. Sophie sat strapped in, her eyes scanning the dark horizon beyond the open bay doors. The rhythmic vibration was almost meditative, grounding her. Across from her, Liam sat rigid, his eyes alert, waiting for the right moment to speak. But she wasn't ready yet. Not until she fully detached from the civilian world, from the party, the insults, the suffocating family politics. Finally, she nodded, a brief command. "We need you," Liam said, his voice steady. "There's been a breach." She paused, reaching into her coat pocket. A small velvet case clicked open, revealing the insignia of a full bird colonel. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a glint of silver that felt like armor. She pinned it over her heart, letting it settle. "I thought you were off-grid until January," Liam remarked, his voice low against the engine's roar. "I was," she replied. "I still am, as far as they know." He handed her a thin, unmarked file. She opened it, her eyes racing over lines of scrambled code and a time-stamped transmission log. "Encrypted comms," she muttered. "Level 6 protocol." In that moment, Sophie felt the weight of her father's shadow lift just a little. She was no longer just the girl in the background. She was stepping into her own light, ready to reclaim her name and her place in a world that had long overlooked her. The night was dark, but she was ready to shine. Sophie Williams stood at the edge of the rooftop, city lights flickering like distant stars, each one a reminder of the life she left behind. The cool night breeze carried the scent of rain and the rustle of leaves, whispering secrets long buried. Her heart pounded, mixing adrenaline, doubt, and a gnawing sense that she was teetering on the brink of something impossible to turn back from. Shadows of her father's impossible expectations pressed down, louder than ever. Just as she took a step back, a sudden crackle broke through her earpiece. "Sophie, we need you now. It's about your father." The words hit her like a punch, heavy, unspoken truths lurking just out of view. What had she missed? Could this be the moment she finally finds her place, and at what cost? Somewhere beneath the flickering glow, her resolve held steady, but the night held its breath. This was her fight, her story, and it was about to change everything. The city waited, silent and watchful, and she knew. This wasn't over yet. The breach was either from within or someone dangerously close. As the chopper landed silently on the secure pad, the doors swung open, revealing the dim glow of underground lights. Sophie stepped out first, her eyes adjusting to the stark contrast between the night outside and the secrecy within. This facility was buried deep beneath layers of concrete and red tape. Here, clearance wasn't just about access, it was about consequences. The air felt charged, almost suffocating in its weight. Inside the briefing room, an intelligence officer nodded, activating a secure monitor. Lines of data scrolled across the screen, culminating in a trace window. Sophie leaned in, her heart racing. There it was, timestamp, signal source, user Shaw E5. The location blinked ominously, civilian IP triangulated through residential Wi-Fi. The IP address glowed on the screen. Shaw Residence. Her heart didn't stop, but something inside her froze, as if her veins had turned to ice. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Liam took a cautious step forward. "Ma'am." But Sophie remained silent, her gaze locked on that single, damning line of truth. Shaw Residence. A heavy silence enveloped the room, the kind that only exists in confined spaces. It reminded her of the dark, padlocked room she'd known at 9. The walls of her quarters were painted the same dull gray as every other secure unit she'd inhabited. No pictures, no distractions, just hard surfaces designed to reject emotion. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she held her phone loosely. A new message blinked on the screen. Naomi Harris. Eve, do you remember that winter? I do. I've never forgotten. The words felt like a whisper in a sealed room. Too quiet to be real, too precise to be accidental. She stared at the text, thumb hovering, but she didn't move. Finally, she set the phone down on her nightstand, her breath steady yet shallow. What did it all mean? Who had betrayed her? The implications washed over her like a cold wave, leaving her breathless. The sterile air felt suffocating, each heartbeat echoing in her ears. Shadows danced on the walls, mirroring the turmoil within her. The monitor's glow illuminated her face, revealing a mix of determination and dread. The threat was closer than she ever imagined. This was her moment. The city waited, silent and watchful. And she knew. This wasn't over yet. The past didn't just revisit her. It hit like a wall of cold waves, each one sharper than the last. A twinge behind her ribs, the scent of rust and damp wood filling her nose. Her eyes shut tight, and suddenly, her mind opened wide. It was winter when she was 9. The sky, more than anything, was flat and gray, stretched too tight over the world. She remembers the way snow crunched beneath her boots, the sharp bite of wind, and Liam's voice daring her to go faster down that tiny hill by the fence. She smiled back, trusting him. Then he hit that rock. The scream? Short, quick, gone before it fully formed. His arm twisted in ways it shouldn't, makes her stomach lurch. She ran, heart pounding, frantic, apologizing before anyone even knew she was there. But her mother, Vivian Shaw. She was already making her decision, her jaw clenched tight. No tears, no outrage, just icy resolve. Go to the backyard, her mother said, voice cold as steel. No trial, no words, just a rusted padlock and that screeching, groaning shed door closing behind her. That first night, Sophie stayed quiet, too scared to breathe hard. Her chest ached, tiny clouds escaping her lips in the dark. She clutched a torn blanket, tried to find comfort in the darkness. The second night, she learned something shocking: how to be still, how to disappear. Hunger sharpened the silence, made the hours stretch like taffy. Counting cracks, rust spots, seconds slipping by. By the third night, even counting was too loud. Silence was no longer empty. It was filled with neglect, with indifference, the kind that teaches you how to fold into yourself, how to hide, how to vanish. They never fed her, never checked if she was okay. Not once. When they finally let her out, no words of apology, just the turn of a key, a whisper, next time, she'll stay. That sunlight, it burned her eyes after so much darkness, a constant reminder of how much she'd lost, and how much she was still trying to find. And somehow, underneath that memory, Sophie wonders, how much of that shadow still lives inside her? How much of her fight is born from that silence? The city waits now, silent, watching. She's not just running from her past, she's trying to become something stronger. And maybe, it's only just beginning. Sophie stood in her dimly lit closet, a winter coat hanging heavy on her shoulders. At the very bottom, tucked in a forgotten corner of the inner lining, she found it. A crumpled slip of paper she hadn't seen in years. She didn't remember slipping it there. Carefully, she pulled it free. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like a child's attempt at making sense of chaos. Stay small. Stay invisible. Stay safe. The words cut deep. Her chest tightened as she sat back down, legs suddenly weightless. She read that note 3 times, each time trembling. Then she folded it gently, tucking it back into the coat. That note was her armor for years. It carried her through military missions, undercover ops, the silence of her family's cold love. She'd learned early how to disappear, how to blend into the shadows. Her phone vibrated again. Naomi. That name felt like a spark in dry brush. "I see what they did," Naomi had messaged. "I didn't speak up then, but I can now." Sophie's eyes fixed on the screen, her pulse pounding. Naomi was her childhood shadow, an unspoken bond, secret whispers across the street. 20 years apart, and now she's breaking that silence. Sophie hesitated, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from something long locked inside trying to break free. She didn't reply yet. Not because she didn't want to, because some truths are better left buried, right? But how long before those buried secrets force their way out? It's only a matter of time. Sophie leaned in, her heart racing as she rewound the clip, frame by frame. Each pause revealed a new layer of betrayal. Liam stood just behind their father, his expression blank, eyes averted. Their mother, Vivian, wore a smile that felt rehearsed, as if they had all agreed beforehand. She does not belong. A soft knock on the door broke her focus. Marcus Hale peeked in, silent, handing her a sealed envelope before gesturing to the remote. "News outlets are circling like vultures," he muttered, disappearing as quickly as he came. Sophie turned up the volume. A reporter's voice sliced through the tension. Earlier today, at the promotion ceremony of Public Safety Director Nicholas Carter, a minor incident involving a guest occurred. Reportedly, his daughter was caught on camera and has since gained traction on social media. Sources close to the family say she was not expected to attend. Then came the pre-recorded interview. Nicholas's voice was controlled, calm, rehearsed. "My daughter Sophie is pursuing other interests. We support her in that journey and ask for privacy as a family." She muted the TV, the phrase stinging more than it should have. Not honored veteran, not Colonel Carter, just other interests. A humorless chuckle escaped her lips, cold and bitter. Her phone rang. Liam. She let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Eve," he began, his voice clipped. "You didn't have to show up. You know how Dad is. It wasn't the place." "Wasn't the place?" she echoed quietly. He announced the promotion like he was ascending Olympus. He mentioned everyone by name except me. "You weren't supposed to be there," he replied. "Look, the press is spinning it. If you just lay low for a bit, this will pass." Silence stretched between them. "You're asking me to disappear again," she said, her voice flat. "I'm asking you not to make this worse for any of us." He hung up before she could respond. Sophie tossed the phone onto the table, standing up. The envelope Marcus had delivered sat unopened, a weighty reminder of the secrets lurking just beneath the surface. The air felt thick, suffocating, as she realized her struggle for recognition was tied to a truth that could shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. How long before those buried secrets forced their way out? It was only a matter of time. The faint scent of rain still hung in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of ink on the paper. Sophie's fingers trembled, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Inside, a photo, blurry but undeniable, a snapshot of her father, Nicholas Carter, in profile, with a headline beneath, "Estranged Daughter Crashes Ceremony." She snorted, the sound sharp and bitter. It was almost laughable. Then a buzz. Her phone vibrated violently against the table. Naomi. Sophie hesitated, eyes flickering to the screen. "I have something that might flip this narrative," the message read. She didn't reply, yet. Because seconds later, a new file arrived. Just 13 seconds. She stared at it, heart pounding. Did she dare? With a deep breath, she hit play. The shaky footage, likely recorded with a hidden phone, brought her straight into the chaos. The audio was crystal clear. Nicholas Carter's voice, cold and contemptuous. "She's an embarrassment. She'll ruin this night. Keep her outside." Sophie's eyes widened. The image was her. her face moments before being asked to leave. She rewound, watched herself, turned away as her father's camera ignored her, just as he had systematically dismissed her for years. She typed a reply. "Where'd you get this, Naomi?" Her old friend's words hit her. "I record when I get nervous." The truth, that she'd been close enough to overhear, that stung more than she cared to admit. Her gaze fixed on the screen, replaying that heartbreaking moment. Her fingers reached into a drawer, clutching her military insignia, her silent armor, and set it beside the photo. 13 seconds of reality. Then she whispered to herself, "Let's ruin it properly." From outside, a sudden wind surged, hot, wild, like a storm summoned from nowhere. The gentle jazz of the party drowned beneath the roar of chaos. Glass shattered. Flutes abandoned their delicate balance. People scrambled, confused amid the gusts. Someone staggered, knocking over a tray of snacks. A child clung to their mother, eyes wide. Then the unmistakable whisper of rotor blades sliced through the tension, growing louder. Shadows danced across the manicured lawn as the helicopter descended. Unexpected, disruptive. Partygoers looked up, faces frozen in surprise. Laughter dissolved into whispers of uncertainty. Sophie stood her ground amid the storm of sound and motion. Deep down, she understood what this was, the breaking point. Her story, her truth, ready to finally make its mark. And somehow she knew her fight for recognition, her place in the family, was only just beginning. The helicopter landed with a thud, cutting through the stillness of the perfectly manicured yard. It was a display of success, a legacy on show. The emblem on the side was unmistakable to anyone who knew the Department of Defense. The door swung open, and out stepped Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale, his uniform sharp, posture rigid. His eyes were locked on one person only. Not the mayor, not the chief of police, not the dignitaries clutching their flutes of champagne with trembling hands. He walked straight toward Sophie Williams. The crowd parted, murmurs rippling through the air as if time itself had paused. Hale stopped just 2 feet from her, snapping a sharp salute. "Colonel Shaw," he called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need you. It's urgent." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie didn't blink. She returned the salute with precision, every inch the officer she had been for years. "Understood," she replied, her voice steady. "Apologies for the intrusion," Hale continued, now addressing the onlookers. "We're responding to a breach tied to Operation Sigma. Colonel Shaw's expertise is required immediately. Time-sensitive, classified." A rustle swept through the crowd. Nicholas Carter stood frozen, his expression unreadable. But a closer look revealed the strain in his pale face, the corners of his mouth twitching as if he couldn't decide whether to deny or feint. Vivian stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if to stop Sophie, but her voice caught in her throat. Liam stood behind them, both silent. Then a voice broke the tension. "She's a colonel." A woman in a pale lavender dress turned to her husband. "She's that Sophie Williams." Another voice chimed in. "What the hell have we done?" Sophie turned slightly, her eyes sweeping the crowd, not in anger, not with vindication, but with something deeper, something calmer. Her silence was no longer an act of fear, it was power. She met her father's gaze for a long moment. No words passed between them. There were none left worth saying. With a deep breath, she turned and followed Marcus into the unknown, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. As she stepped away, the distant hum of the helicopter's rotors lingered, a stark contrast to the heavy silence. Unspoken truths pressed in on her. Something had been uncovered, something she had been chasing in her own shadows. Her fists tightened and her mind raced. Just as she stepped forward, a sudden glance over her shoulder revealed a flicker, an unfamiliar figure watching her from the trees, eyes gleaming with secrets. What were they hiding, and what was about to change forever? The helicopter blades whirred to life, slicing through the air as Sophie Williams climbed in, leaving her father behind. She didn't look back. From her seat, she caught a glimpse of Nicholas Carter, a figure frozen on his own lawn, surrounded by a power he could no longer control. The aircraft lifted off, sending a gust that ruffled the mayor's toupee. Sophie didn't smile, but her lips parted slightly as if she could finally breathe. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the moment. It was Naomi. A new post was live, a screenshot of the helicopter landing, accompanied by a 13-second clip of her father's words. The caption read, "The Forgotten Colonel." Sophie turned her gaze out the window, the horizon stretching ahead. It was time to stop fading into the background. The breach wasn't just in the system, it was in her name. The monitor glowed a cold blue, casting flickering shadows across her face. Each keystroke brought her closer to the truth, but it tightened her chest. Someone had infiltrated Operation Sigma using credentials tied directly to her digital fingerprint, her clearance signature, her history. This wasn't just a hack, it was an accusation. The Cyber Ops Center hummed quietly behind her, texts murmuring about patch updates and encrypted nodes. But Sophie was in her own world, eyes locked on one particular IP address. Her stomach twisted as the metadata confirmed it. The origin traced back to her father's house, the very network where she'd watched cartoons on lazy Sunday mornings, long before everything turned cold. "Cross-reference timestamp," she muttered. The system complied. The breach had occurred at 3:42 a.m. the night of the promotion party. She pulled up the device registry from the Shaw residence. Liam's tablet had been active at that time. So had the smart TV. Coincidence? She doubted it. "Need a hand?" Hale's voice jolted her from her thoughts. She turned slightly, shielding her screen. "Just reviewing breach pathways," she replied, her tone clipped. He didn't press. He knew better than to hover when she was deep in her work, especially when it involved her past. As Sophie gazed out the window, processing her newfound clarity, her phone buzzed violently. She glanced down, an unexpected message from her father. But it wasn't a text. Instead, an old, grainy video began to play. Nicholas, years ago, in a quiet moment of vulnerability, revealing that her entire struggle for recognition was rooted in a secret he had hidden for decades. The realization hit her like a cold wave, flipping her entire view of her father and herself on its head. What had she been fighting for? Family loyalty? Her own identity? The weight of it all pressed down on her, and she felt the world shift beneath her feet. The smell of burnt toast still lingered in the kitchen, filling the space with a quiet sense of nostalgia. A tattered photo of her father hung on the wall, his stern face a silent reminder of the man who had always overshadowed her. The city buzzed outside, its early morning hum filtering through the window, but in Sophie's mind, everything was eerily still. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, alone, yet not really. Her small hand clutched a cold coffee mug, the ceramic smooth against her palm. She stared out the window, her eyes scanning the distant horizon, as if hoping for some sign, some clue to answer the swirling questions inside her. Where did she fit? Who was she, really? Was she just a daughter? A reflection of someone else's life? Or could she carve out her own path? The taste of bitterness lingered on her tongue, much like the frustration gnawing at her chest. She had always lived in her father's shadow. His legacy loomed large, casting long, unyielding darkness over everything she did. She had tried, for years, to step out, to be recognized, to be seen for the person she was becoming. But every time, it felt like the world refused to acknowledge her. Was she just meant to be a footnote in someone else's story? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of the daze. A message. It was from an anonymous sender, encrypted. Another clue. Another layer of the mystery she had been unraveling for months. But what if it wasn't just a digital trail she was following? What if the truth went deeper? The sudden realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about a hack. This was personal. She wasn't just fighting for recognition. She was fighting for her place in a world that had always wanted her to stay in the background. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. What had her father hidden all these years? What was she really up against? The room seemed to close in on her, and for a moment, everything went silent. I hesitated, then clicked. One line flashed onto the screen. White text, stark against black. Walk away, or your service record burns with you. Threats don't scare me. Silence does, because threats can be traced, filed, neutralized. Silence leaves only instinct, raw, primal. Right then, I knew I was outside the rules. Moving through the back corridors of the base, under the dull red light, my boots muffled on rubber floors. Everyone else was off shift. That's how I wanted it. This wasn't routine. It wasn't a drill. Cyber Ops Control was locked tight. I bypassed the scanner with my clearance chip, left no log, no trace. If somebody was watching, I had to pretend I wasn't. Loaded a fake file into the restricted server. Operation Ghost Night. Made it convincing enough, attract attention, fake data, no harm done. A forged mission, time-stamped, with a false transfer order, me leading a covert op that never existed. Then I waited, and I didn't have to wait long. Hours later, Naomi's voice cracked through my secure line, sharp, disbelief in every word. Rogue data just hit a darknet forum. Someone dropped a file, marked Ghost Night, U.S. lead clearance, Sophie, uploaded 20 minutes ago. Impossible. The only copy was on our classified server. I told her, "That's what I'm saying. It leaked." My pulse spiked. Trap was set, bait taken. Someone inside was watching, couldn't resist the game. "Can you trace the upload?" I asked. Beautiful. The scent of old leather and gun oil lingered in the air. I stood in my father's study, every inch of the room screaming history. His accolades, his medals, each one a story I'd heard 1,000 times. But the one story that never got told? Mine. My fingers traced the fabric of his uniform, a faint connection to the man who'd always been my hero. And yet, my shadow. I had learned the lessons early. To be better, to be stronger, to make my mark. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always a deeper, unspoken truth. I was meant to be less. Always in his shadow. Always second. I wanted to understand where I fit, where my place in this family was. Was I supposed to follow his footsteps, or create my own? But as the sunlight streamed in, so did the realization. Recognition, acceptance, would always be a battle, and I'd have to fight it alone. I had always known there were things hidden in the corners of my father's life, but this was something else. It wasn't just about hacking or stolen data. It was about my own identity being stolen. "Someone's using your father's credentials, Sophie," Naomi's voice crackled through my secure line. My pulse skipped. I'd seen that badge number before, hundreds of times as a kid, memorized it, and now it was linked to the breach, my father's badge number. The man who pretended I didn't exist, now using my military identity to prop up his golden child. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't Liam being opportunistic. It was orchestration. I stared at the screen, my fists clenched. He had erased me. But worse, he'd tried to replace me. A knock. Hale stepped in, his gaze sharp. "Internal liaison needs you for a review tomorrow. They want to know why your clearance log spiked last week." "Routine file integrity sweeps," I replied, voice steady, and under my breath I added, "Tell them I'm just getting started." The Judge Advocate General's office always smelled like paperwork and cold coffee, a place where silence reigned, where things disappeared behind polite words. But as I walked in, empty-handed, the weight I carried wasn't paperwork. It was my memory. The story of a woman who had always been overshadowed, erased, and replaced, but never forgotten. I wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. I was fighting for my place in this world. I stepped up to the clerk's window, my voice steady but my heart racing. I'd like to file a report. Badge cloning suspicion. Tier 3 credentials compromised. The clerk raised an eyebrow, already reaching for the necessary form. Name of the suspected officer? She asked. No name, not yet, I replied, my mind racing. But the badge ID is embedded in leaked data. I need a controlled audit, non-escalated. She hesitated, then nodded. We can flag it for internal review. Discrete path, chain of custody will be logged. I thanked her, slipping out before she could ask anything else. The trap was set. Now, it just needed time. The sun hung low as I pulled into the gravel lot of an old diner on Route 14, a place so dull it felt safe. Inside, Naomi was already waiting, 2 mugs of coffee steaming between us. She slid one over without a word. I assume you came from legal, she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. They've opened the file quietly, I replied. Naomi leaned in, her voice dropping. Then, let's talk louder off the record. She opened her laptop, shielding it from the window glare. I've been compiling a timeline, she said, her fingers flying over the keys. Mostly Liam. He's been accessing military-adjacent files under a civilian shell account. The trail is clumsy, but it's there. She clicked a few keys, and a spreadsheet appeared, highlighted dates, file names, timestamps. One of them stood out, OP SIG E5 clearance.pdf. That file was internal only, I whispered, my stomach dropping. He never should have seen it. Someone either gave him access or let him think he earned it. I leaned back, fingers tightening around the mug. Check my personnel file. I want a full metadata sweep, modification logs, red lines, annotations, everything. Naomi didn't ask why. She just nodded and got to work. Minutes later, her face paled. Sophie, she said quietly, your file shows a status change. 4 days ago. My blood ran cold. What kind of change? She turned the screen toward me. There it was, quiet and unassuming. Status inactive, pending review, buried deep in the admin layer of my record. No notification had been sent. No official audit launched. I felt the weight of the world pressing down. My identity, my place in this family was slipping away. I was fighting not just for recognition, but for my very existence. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't just a shadow anymore. I was ready to step into the light. The air in the room felt electric, like something big was about to break. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was simple, and it hit like a bomb. Sophie's heart raced. Her grip tightened around the manila folder. Robert knew. All those walls she'd built, the family, the career, the expectations, everything she thought was secure, it was starting to collapse. The truth wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a weapon, aimed straight at her. And now, there was no turning back. She sat still for a moment, her thoughts racing. How had it come to this? The man she once trusted, her father's shadow, was the very one trying to erase her. Naomi's eyes met hers, full of understanding. If we go public, are you sure? She asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. I'm beyond sure, Sophie replied, her voice steady. Just redact anything that puts people in danger, but leave enough for them to see who I really am. With a click, Naomi opened the folder, scanning the contents. Shock flashed across her face as she read. You led Black Ops reconnaissance in 2009. Drone recovery in Kandahar. You got a commendation no one was allowed to mention. Sophie's silence spoke volumes. She had played by their rules for too long. Now it was time for the world to hear her side. The narrative Naomi crafted was precise, a surgical cut to expose the truth without bitterness, just raw facts. Mission logs, commendation footnotes, files buried for years, all coming to light. And with every word released, Sophie felt the ground shifting under her feet. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about her place in the world, about stepping out of the shadows. This was only the beginning. She titled it, The colonel in the shadows goes live in 60 seconds, Naomi said, hitting the button. The post detonated. Within the hour, military forums lit up. Defense analysts began dissecting Operation Code names. Veterans commented with cautious support. Then, civilians caught wind. And once the mainstream press picked it up, it exploded. Why was this officer erased? Colonel Shaw, the quiet hero of a forgotten war brother, celebrated sister, silenced the military's hidden shame by mourning. Liam had been summoned to a preliminary ethics review. Internal Affairs had flagged discrepancies in his security clearance paperwork. His spotless resume had suddenly acquired shadows. I watched it unfold from a safe house, a government-leased studio outside Langley where no one could trace my login or location. Hale checked in briefly, dropping off a burner phone and some rations. "You're burning bridges," he said, "and building something better on the ashes, I hope." "I'm not doing this to be heard," I replied. "I'm doing this so they can't lie anymore." Naomi called. "You should hear this." She played a voicemail left on her encrypted line. Robert's voice. "I know what you're doing. I will sue. I will ruin her again. This time, permanently." Naomi's tone was ice. I recorded it, every word. The article was updated 10 minutes later. A 24-second clip was embedded beneath the final paragraph. In it, Nicholas Carter said with measured disdain, "She was always in the way, even as a child." The clip went viral faster than the article itself. Comments flooded in. "This man has no soul. I want to see her in uniform, standing proud, not hiding in the dark. We failed her. The tide had turned. But I knew too well tides recede just as fast." The burner phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Unknown number I picked up. "We need to speak now. Every lie has a file. Every truth does too. The difference is one gets erased, the other waits." The Pentagon's records division was colder than I remembered. The flickering glow of the monitor cast long shadows across Sophie's face. Outside, the city's rain whispered against the window, soft, relentless. She hesitated, hand hovering over the unsealed envelope. Her pulse quickened. Inside that paper lay the secret she'd hunted for years, proof that could finally crack her father's silence wide open. But what if it's more than she bargained for? What if the truth drags her deeper into his world? Her fingers trembled, but she pushed forward, breath catching. The room felt thick with history, memories she'd sworn to forget. The weight of her choices pressed against her chest. She knew uncovering the truth might free her, or break her completely. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible voice whispered from the shadows. Will she open it? Or walk away, lost in the darkness she's tried to escape? In that moment, everything hinges on one question. How much am I willing to risk for the truth? In the attic's darkness, Sophie stands frozen, clutching a worn photo of her father. The scent of dust and old wood wraps around her, thick and heavy. Her heartbeat echoes, loud, relentless. She remembers his booming laugh, how he dismissed her dreams as childish. And then, the day she felt invisible, lost in his shadow, craving his approval. The attic becomes a vault, secrets stored in every corner. Can you imagine the weight of all that silence? The unspoken words pressing down, almost tangible. Her fingers trace the photograph, trembling. Does she dare look deeper? What truths hide behind her father's proud smile? The air thickens as she questions everything. Her place, her worth. Outside, rain taps softly, a gentle reminder that some storms come slow. She's at a crossroads now, torn between reclaiming herself or staying buried in the past. That one question hangs. How far is she willing to go to find her voice? For 2 decades, I was told to serve in the shadows, to act without recognition, to win battles that would never echo in the halls of history. I mastered the art of invisibility. A hush fell over the room as I raised the folder. This is my service record, sealed, redacted, nearly erased until now. I opened it slowly, revealing the first pages. Operation Fenrir, Operation Sigma, encrypted field commendations. The same names and codes Naomi had leaked online were now real, undeniable, tangible in my hands. I led covert missions across 5 continents. My career wasn't wiped from public record for security. It was for convenience. Acknowledging me would complicate the narratives others wanted to tell. Gasps rippled through the audience. A woman near the press bench began to cry softly. I scanned the crowd, locking eyes with the military brass in the reserved row. Most wore blank expressions except for one, a general I recognized from Kandahar. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, jaw clenched. "I'm not invisible anymore," I declared, "and I won't stay quiet so others can remain comfortable." I stepped back from the mic, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. The general stood, his voice deep and resonant. "Colonel Shaw," he said, "I served with you. I read those reports. It's a disgrace what has been done to your record." He approached the stage, each step echoing in the silence. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a velvet case. "This," he said, "was sent to my office with instructions to delay presentation indefinitely." He opened the case, revealing a silver medal. "By the authority vested in me," he continued, "I reinstate your commendation effective immediately." A camera flash went off, then another, a cascade of light. Naomi's exposé was already trending. I felt the weight of the medal in my hand, heavier than I expected, not for what it represented but for the cost of earning it in silence. In that moment, I realized the truth. Recognition isn't just about the accolades. It's about reclaiming your voice, your story, and I was ready to tell mine. The studio buzzed with anticipation, the air heavy with the smell of stale coffee and glass cleaner, that unmistakable scent of every network room I'd ever stepped into before. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't the quiet shadow in the background. I was walking in as me. The chair across from me was empty for now. A countdown was flashing on the monitor. Naomi, off to the side, held her laptop like a weapon. Her exposé had already gone viral. 6 million views in 24 hours. But tonight, this was the real strike. The host entered, all polished professionalism, cautious like he wasn't sure whether he was sitting across from a hero or a ticking bomb. The lights flickered on. I didn't flinch. "We're live in 3, 2. The red light blinked on. "Tonight, we sit down with Colonel Sophie Williams, whose career, until now, was erased from the public eye." I took a breath. It felt like the world had gone silent. "I've been invisible long enough," I said, steady. "It's time to be seen." The host nodded, trying to keep his cool. He gestured toward the screen. A clip rolled. Operation Fenrir, blurred images flashing in and out, Naomi's voice cutting through. She didn't just serve. She was erased. Then came the photos. My father, Robert Williams, at all those high-profile events, shaking hands, giving awards. A father's pride on display, while my own achievements sat buried beneath his shadow. Then, the bomb dropped. "If she speaks," a voice crackled from the speaker deep and smooth, "I speak too. You don't want that." It was my father's voice, the one I hadn't heard in years, the one Naomi had dug up from an old voicemail chain. And now, that same voice, speaking in front of millions, cut through the silence I'd been trapped in for so long. The studio froze. The host leaned forward, voice trembling just a bit. "Colonel, how do you respond to that?" I didn't blink. "Then speak," I said coldly, "but I will no longer hide." Another clip rolled. My father, years ago, preaching about transparency in law enforcement. His words echoed, hollow against the backdrop of Naomi's exposé, a timeline of access logs, badge fraud, and a network of lies. His speech about transparency, now drowned out by the truth we had all fought so hard to bury. every one of his words twisted, pulled apart by the evidence we had verified. But this time, I wasn't letting him control the narrative. I stared into the lens, my voice louder than it had ever been. It's not just about visibility. It's about truth, and I'm here to speak mine. The rain still tap-tapped against the window as Sophie sat in her dimly lit apartment, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing inside her. Her hands trembled slightly on the counter, the scent of wet earth lingering in the air. Her mind raced. Was everything she knew about her family just a set of carefully crafted lies? She had always fought for recognition, for respect. Yet here she was, face to face with a truth that threatened to shatter her whole world. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, Naomi's name glowing on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. "You won't believe what just surfaced. It's bigger than we thought." Sophie's eyes narrowed as her pulse quickened. She knew she was close to the edge, but how close? The tension thickened, the stakes rising higher with every second. Just then, the news anchor's voice cut through the silence. "Breaking news. Stay tuned," it said. Sophie stared at the screen, her breath hitching. Was her entire identity about to be ripped apart? The camera zoomed in, capturing the flicker of doubt, the flicker of hope. Her heart pounded. Could she finally uncover the truth? Or was this only the beginning of a secret darker than she ever imagined? The air grew colder as the story unfolded. Outside, the city's chaos continued, unaware of the storm in Sophie's soul. What would she discover when the truth was finally revealed? And where would she stand when all was laid bare? The answer hung in the silence, waiting to be seen. Sophie Williams sat alone in her apartment, the rain tapping gently against the window, a steady rhythm in the quiet chaos of her thoughts. Her fingers brushed against the cool, damp counter as the scent of wet earth filled the air. She could hear her father's voice in her head, distant and stern, his harsh words, the moments when his eyes would flash with disappointment. The frustration she'd felt, the ache of being unseen. It was all still there, buried deep, clawing its way to the surface. Sophie stared at her phone. Naomi's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated. "You won't believe what just surfaced," Naomi's voice said, sharp with urgency. "It's bigger than we thought." Sophie's heart raced. Was this the breakthrough she'd been waiting for? Or the moment her entire life would unravel? Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure which was scarier, facing the truth or living in the shadows of a lie. Her eyes flicked to the news. The anchor's voice cut through the silence. "Breaking news. Stay tuned." Sophie's breath caught in her chest. She knew she was on the edge, but how much further could she go before everything broke apart? Was the truth really worth the cost? The room felt colder now, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil inside her. Sophie stood, thoughts spinning. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Her family, her past, the truth. Could she face it all? Then came the knock. It wasn't just any knock. This was the knock that would change everything. Her mother's letter arrived that night. No return address, just her name in familiar cursive. Sophie's hand trembled as she picked it up, feeling the weight of years of silence pressing down on her. What would she discover when the truth was finally revealed? And where would she stand when the lies had nowhere left to hide? Sophie wasn't sure, but she was done waiting. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth as Sophie Williams stood in the cemetery, her breath forming little clouds that vanished too quickly. The weight of her past pressed into her bones as her fingers traced the cold bronze plaque. It read, "To those who served without praise." Her heart thundered in her chest as she pulled out the small velvet box revealing the colonel's pin, a symbol of everything she'd fought for. She placed it on the stone. No words, no photos, just silence. But as she turned to leave, something felt different. She wasn't just walking away from a past, she was stepping into the unknown. Later, Sophie handed over an envelope to the director of a women's veteran center, a check large enough to keep them afloat for an entire year. When asked for a photo, Sophie declined. Some battles were meant to be fought in shadows, where anonymity became armor. That afternoon, Naomi showed up, her eyes haunted by sleepless nights. She slid a folder across the table. "I have a title," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Invisible Rank." Sophie skimmed the first pages. Stories of women like her, forgotten, erased, their names lost in the shuffle of history. The idea sent a chill down her spine. Was this the moment everything would change? Was she ready to let the world in? "You sure people want to read this?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. Naomi didn't flinch. "They already are. They just don't know it yet." They agreed to start small, nothing that demanded too much. But Sophie knew that silence wouldn't last. The weight of the truth was already pushing through, ready to break free. And just as Sophie wondered what came next, a shadowed figure appeared outside her door, calling her name softly. "Sophie, are you really ready to let go?" Her heart skipped. The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Would she face the past, or would the ghosts of her past swallow her whole? The shed still stood, though smaller now. Its paint peeled, hinges rusted, and the door hung slightly ajar. I stood there for what felt like hours, just listening, hoping for some sign, anything, maybe a creak, a cough, a whisper from the past, but it stayed silent. Dead. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The floor groaned beneath me, the air thick with mildew and forgotten stories. "I'm not that girl anymore," I whispered to the walls. Back in my apartment, I pulled out the old coat, the one I wore when I was 9. It still had the patch my mother stitched over a tear, like dignity sewn over wounds. I lit a match. The coat burned slow and stubborn in the bathtub, curling up as if it wanted to stay. But eventually, it turned to ash. The next morning, Naomi sent me a message. "The mayor wants to meet you. He says, 'Your father's silence says everything.'" I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted the truth, the record corrected. But what came next was something else. The square outside City Hall had been completely rebuilt. New bricks, fresh oak benches, banners fluttering in the breeze. A temporary stage stood beneath 2 towering sycamores. Rows of folding chairs were lined up, filled with veterans, schoolchildren, older couples holding hands, and cameras snapping from every angle. My name was printed on every program. I waited backstage in dress blues I hadn't worn in over a decade. Every medal gleamed, every detail perfect. Naomi stood beside me, not as a journalist this time, just a friend, someone who remembered. An aide leaned in. "They're ready." I stepped into the sunlight. The crowd hushed. The mayor's voice echoed from the podium. "Colonel Sophie Williams, who served in silence but now stands in the light." Applause, not loud but real. My heart raced, but I didn't smile. Not yet. The mayor handed me a blue velvet box. Inside, the City Medallion of Honor, the first one ever given to a living female officer. The ribbon shimmered, gold and navy, like the past and the future finally meeting. The ghosts of my past weren't gone, but they were fading, slowly, and for the first time, I didn't mind. He spoke again. Words about service beyond measure, about integrity under pressure, about reminding this city that silence isn't the same as absence. I stepped up to the podium. The microphone buzzed, then quieted. "I wasn't erased," I said. "I was hidden, covered, decorated in secrecy." For years I'd accepted that. But justice came late, still came. A hush fell over everything. My family wasn't here today. That used to sting. Now, the silence of those who buried the truth makes space for the ones willing to lift it. I looked out into the crowd. Marcus Hale stood just left of the center, straight-backed, a small smile beneath his salute. Naomi stood off to the side, her phone down, eyes shining with something unspoken. The medals I'd earned. They meant something. But what hit harder was knowing I didn't have to die to be seen. The applause grew, louder this time, genuine, unfiltered. After the ceremony, I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, catching quiet thanks. Reporters called questions, but Naomi gently stepped in front of me. Then I felt a tug at my sleeve. A girl, maybe 10, in an oversized blazer, her hair braided tight like she meant business, looked up at me. Big eyes, full of hope. "Are you really a colonel?" she asked. "Yes," I nodded. "Really?" she whispered, voice low. Then she straightened, raising her hand in a careful salute, then dropping it fast. "I want to be like you," she said, voice almost a whisper. I knelt so we could meet eye to eye. Her hand trembled just a little. "Stand tall. Never hide." She gave me a tentative smile. The truth arrived quietly that day. No fanfare, no thunder, just Sophie, where once she was erased, now seen. The betrayal that almost silenced me became the reason I was finally heard. Justice. Sometimes it's late. But when it comes, it hits deep, echoing in the quiet. When we face injustice with courage, the final verdict sticks with us, sometimes for a lifetime. Sophie stands alone in her dimly lit apartment, rain streaking the window like tears. Her hands tremble, clutching a photo she barely recognizes. Shadows flicker across her face. She finally raises her voice, fighting back the past, the doubts. "Why did he leave?" Her voice cracks, heavy with unanswered questions. A gust of wind rattles the window, scent of rain filling the room. Tears blur her eyes. Then she breathes deeply, steadying herself. For the first time, she sees it. Her strength isn't built on recognition. It's in breaking free from shadows that once defined her. She's not a silhouette in her father's world anymore. She's her own story. The rain continues outside, relentless and real. Today, Sophie isn't hiding. She's finally standing tall, embracing who she truly is. And the silence finally breaks.